The diplomatic vessel hung in the darkness of space like a silver promise. Inside its largest chamber, representatives from dozens of worlds gathered around a circular table that glowed with soft blue light. The air felt thick with tension. 3 years of war had brought them here, to this moment hoping for peace. Tayo Kim stood near the back of the human delegation, his hands clasped behind his back. He wore the simple gray uniform of the Terran Cultural Corps, not the decorated armor of a soldier. His face showed the tiredness that came from too many negotiations, too many compromises. At 32 years old, he had already seen more conflict than most people experienced in a lifetime. The war had started over a misunderstanding. The Catharan Empire had expanded into a system that humans had already claimed. Neither side would back down. What began as angry words became weapons fire. What became weapons fire turned into 3 years of brutal combat across a dozen star systems. Humans were new to the galactic stage. Most alien species had been exploring space for thousands of years. Earth had only developed faster than light travel 40 years ago. The Galactic Council expected humanity to lose quickly, to surrender and accept Catharan dominance. They were wrong. Humans fought differently. They adapted. They improvised. When Catharan ships used energy shields that deflected traditional weapons, human engineers designed kinetic projectiles that punched through them. When Catharan ground forces used standard battle formations, human soldiers used guerrilla tactics learned from centuries of warfare on Earth. The Catharans were stronger, faster, and had better technology, but humans were stubborn, creative, and refused to give up. Now finally the Catharan Empire wanted to talk. Queen Vera entered the chamber and every conversation stopped. She stood 7 feet tall, her body covered in dark red scales that caught the light like rubies. Her eyes were bright yellow with vertical pupils that saw everything. She wore armor made from black metal that seemed to absorb light, and a crown of silver thorns that marked her status. Behind her walked 6 guards, each one carrying weapons that hummed with barely contained energy. Tayo had never seen a Catharan royal before. He had fought Catharan soldiers, had negotiated with Catharan diplomats, but Queen Vera was different. She moved with absolute confidence, like someone who had never known defeat until recently. The council mediator, an elderly being from the Veltorian species, gestured toward the central platform. Your Majesty, the council offers these terms of peace with gratitude for your wisdom in ending this conflict. Queen Vera said nothing. She walked to her seat and sat down, her tail curling around the chair's base. Her yellow eyes scanned the room, pausing briefly on the human delegation before moving on. The mediator continued, his voice nervous. As reparations for the conflict and as a gesture of goodwill from the council, we present these offerings. Holographic displays appeared above the table. The first showed a fleet of advanced warships. 12 Vanguard-class vessels equipped with the latest defensive systems. Queen Vera barely glanced at them. No, the mediator blinked in surprise. Perhaps territorial concessions would be more appropriate? Another display appeared showing star maps. 4 systems in the neutral zone rich in resources. No. Rare minerals from the crystalline nebula? Advanced medical technology? Cultural artifacts from a dozen civilizations? To each offer, Queen Vera gave the same answer. No. The chamber filled with confused whispers. The human delegation exchanged worried glances. Ambassador Soman Park, who led the human team, leaned forward in her seat. She was a tough woman in her 50s, with gray hair cut short and eyes that missed nothing. The mediator looked lost. Your Majesty, surely there must be something that would satisfy the Catharan Empire? We wish to make amends for this unfortunate conflict. Queen Vera stood up slowly. The room went silent. She stepped down from the platform and began walking around the table. Her clawed feet clicked against the metal floor. Every eye followed her. She passed the Veltorian delegation, the insectoid Carix ambassadors, the floating Luminari representatives. She stopped in front of the human section, her yellow eyes fixed on Tayo. Him, she said, her voice deep and clear. I want him. Tayo felt his heart skip. Ambassador Park stood up immediately. Absolutely not. We are here to negotiate peace, not to hand over our people like property. Queen Vera did not look away from Tayo. The council asked what I would like as treasure. I have made my choice. This human will come with me to the Catharan homeworld. He will stay as my guest. This is my price for peace. The chamber erupted in noise. Aliens shouted in a dozen languages. The human delegation surrounded Ambassador Park, all of them talking at once. The council mediator tried desperately to restore order. Teo stood frozen. He had served as a combat engineer during the war, designing fortifications and defensive systems. When the fighting finally stopped, his superiors noticed his ability to understand alien psychology, to find common ground even with enemies. They transferred him to the cultural core and sent him to these peace talks. He had helped negotiate prisoner exchanges, had written reports on Catharan military culture, had done everything asked of him. But this was something else entirely. Ambassador Park was arguing with Queen Vera now, her face red with anger. He is not an object to be claimed. He is a citizen of Earth, a representative of humanity. You cannot simply take him. I am not taking him, Queen Vera replied calmly. I am requesting him. If he refuses, I will respect that choice. But then there will be no peace. The war will continue. The threat hung in the air like a blade. The mediator looked desperate. Your Majesty, please reconsider. Surely we can find another arrangement. No other arrangement, Queen Vera interrupted. Him or no peace, Theo found his voice. Why me? Queen Vera finally broke her stare and looked at Ambassador Park. Because your intelligence reports say he builds things. Because in the Battle of Arcturus Station, when your forces were trapped and outnumbered, he designed a defense system from broken equipment that held for 3 days until reinforcements arrived. Because when my soldiers captured him briefly on Velcor Prime, he treated their injuries even though they were his enemies. Because he represents what humans are, not just warriors but something else. Something we need to understand. She turned back to Teo. I will ask you directly. Will you come with me? You will not be harmed. You will not be imprisoned. But you will live on my world under my observation until I understand what makes your species so difficult to defeat. This is my offer. Ambassador Park grabbed Teo's arm. You don't have to do this. We'll find another way. Teo looked at his ambassador, then at the other humans in the delegation. He thought about the soldiers still in combat zones waiting for news of peace. He thought about Earth tired from years of war. He thought about all the people who would die if the fighting continued. I'll go, he said quietly. Teo, no, I'll go, he repeated, louder this time. If it means peace, if it means no more people dying, then I'll go. Queen Vera's expression did not change, but something shifted in her yellow eyes. Respect, perhaps, or curiosity. It is decided, she announced to the chamber. Prepare the documents. The war ends today. The human called Teo Kim will accompany me to Velcora. As the chamber descended into organized chaos, lawyers and diplomats rushing to draft agreements, Teo stood still. He had just volunteered to become the property of an alien queen. No, not property. A treasure, whatever that meant. He had no idea what waited for him on the Catharan homeworld, but he knew one thing for certain. His life would never be the same again. The Catharan transport ship cut through the red atmosphere of Velcora like a knife through silk. Teo pressed his face against the viewing port, watching the alien world take shape beneath him. The sky was the color of blood at sunset, thick with crimson clouds that swirled in patterns no Earth weather could match. Below, he saw cities of black stone that rose like thorns from the dark purple landscape. It had been 3 days since he left the diplomatic vessel. 3 days of travel through Catharan space, sleeping in a small cabin that felt more like a luxury hotel room than a prison cell. The guards outside his door never spoke to him, but they brought him food and made sure he had everything he needed. The food was strange but edible, proteins and vegetables from worlds he had never heard of. Queen Vera had traveled on a different ship. Teo had not seen her since he agreed to come. Part of him wondered if she had already forgotten about him, if this was all some elaborate political game he did not understand. The ship landed on a platform that jutted from the side of a massive palace. The structure was built from obsidian that gleamed in the red light, with towers that reached toward the blood-colored sky. As the boarding ramp lowered, hot air rushed into the ship carrying strange scents, sulfur and something sweet like burning flowers. 2 Catharan guards escorted him down the ramp. They were smaller than Queen Vera, but still taller than any human, their scales a lighter shade of red. They wore armor similar to the Queen's, black metal plates that seemed to drink in the light. A figure waited at the bottom of the ramp. This Catharan was different from the guards. She wore robes instead of armor. deep blue fabric that contrasted with her dark orange scales. Her eyes were curious, not hostile. "Welcome to Velcora," she said in heavily accented English. "I am Mirai, I am scholar. I study other species, their culture and language. Queen Vera assigned me to help you adjust to life here." Tayo felt a small wave of relief. At least someone would talk to him. "Thank you. I appreciate that." Miri's head tilted in a way that might have been a smile. Catharan facial expressions were hard to read. "Come, I show you your quarters." Then I explained the rules. The palace interior was as impressive as the outside. Hallways carved from black stone stretched in every direction, lit by crystals that glowed with soft white light. Tapestries hung on the walls, showing battles and conquests from Catharan history. Teo saw images of their ships burning entire planets, of Catharan warriors standing over defeated enemies. It was not subtle. His quarters were larger than his entire apartment back on Earth. The main room had high ceilings supported by pillars carved to look like twisted thorns. A bed big enough for 3 people sat against one wall, covered in fabrics that felt like silk but shimmered with colors that shifted when he touched them. Through an archway, he could see a bathroom with a pool-sized basin that he assumed was for bathing. "This is too much," he said quietly. Mirai made a sound that might have been laughter. "You are Queen's treasure. Must be treated with respect. But understand this, you are guest, not prisoner, but you are also not free. You cannot leave palace grounds without permission. You cannot communicate with your people on Earth without supervision. You will follow Catharan customs while you are here. Break these rules and things become difficult." "I understand." "Good." Mirai moved to the window, which looked out over the palace grounds. "Queen Vera will summon you when she is ready. Until then, you rest, learn, adapt. That is what humans do best, yes?" Before Teo could answer, she left, closing the door behind her. He heard the soft click of a lock engaging. Guest not prisoner, but the door was locked anyway. He spent the rest of that day exploring his quarters, finding hidden storage compartments and controls for lights and temperature that responded to touch. The bed was comfortable despite being designed for a species with different anatomy. He found clothes in one of the storage areas, simple tunics and pants made from that strange shimmering fabric, all in dark colors. Everything fit him perfectly. They had measured him at some point, probably when he was captured briefly during the war. That night he barely slept. The bed was too soft, the room too quiet, and his mind would not stop racing. What did Queen Vera really want? Why had she chosen him specifically? What were these tests Mirai mentioned? The next morning Mirai returned with food and information. She explained the daily schedule. Tayo would be allowed to move freely within certain areas of the palace. He could use the libraries, the gardens, and the observation rooms. But the royal chambers, the military sectors, and the communication centers were forbidden. Days became a week. Tayo fell into a routine. Each morning he would eat breakfast in his quarters. Then he would go to the palace library, a vast room filled with data crystals that contained information about thousands of civilizations. Mirai taught him how to use the interface, and he spent hours reading about Catharan history and culture. He learned that Catharans valued strength above everything else. Their entire society was built on proving oneself through combat and conquest. The strongest became leaders. The weak served or died. They had conquered dozens of worlds, always through military might, never through diplomacy or negotiation. This explained why they had been so confident when the war with humanity started. They had superior technology and stronger warriors. Victory should have been simple. But humans did not fight the way Catharans expected. Humans used tricks and tactics, adapted and improvised. To the Catharans, this was confusing and frustrating. In the afternoons, Teo walked the palace gardens. They were strange and beautiful, filled with plants that grew in the red light of Velcora's sun. Some plants had leaves that moved to follow him as he passed. Others released spores that glowed in the air like tiny stars. He was never alone in the gardens. Guards watched him constantly, though they tried to be subtle about it. On his 10th day on Velcora, he finally saw Queen Vera again. He was in the library, reading about Catharan military philosophy, when the door opened and she entered. The guards who always stood outside immediately knelt. Mirai, who had been helping Tayo with the translation, bowed deeply. Tayo stood up, unsure what protocol demanded. Queen Vera approached, her yellow eyes fixed on him. She was even more impressive up close, towering over him. "You have been reading about my people?" "Yes, Your Majesty. Trying to understand your culture." "And what have you learned?" Teo chose his words carefully. "I have learned that Catharans respect strength and direct action. That you build your society on the idea that the strong should lead and the weak should follow. That you have conquered many worlds through military power." "Correct." She moved past him, running one clawed finger along the spines of data crystal containers. "And what do you think of this philosophy?" It was a test. He knew it was a test. "I think it has made you powerful. But I also think it might have limitations." Her head turned sharply. "Explain." "Strength alone cannot solve every problem. Sometimes you need flexibility, creativity, different ways of thinking. That is why the war between our people lasted so long. Your forces were stronger, but human forces adapted faster." He expected anger. Instead, Queen Vera made a sound that might have been approval. "Interesting. You criticize my people to my face. Most species would fear to do so. You asked for my honest opinion?" "Yes, I did." She gestured to Mireille. "Leave us." Mireille bowed again and left quickly, closing the door behind her. Tayo was alone with the queen. Vera walked to the window that overlooked the city. "Do you know why I chose you, Teo Kim?" "You said it was because I build things. Because I represent human adaptability." "Partially true, but there is more." She turned to face him. "My empire is dying. Not from external enemies, but from within. We have become so focused on strength and conquest that we have forgotten how to grow, how to change. Our colonies fail because we apply the same solutions to every problem. Our economy stagnates because we do not innovate. Our young people grow restless because they see no future beyond endless war." Tayo listened in silence, surprised by her honesty. "When we fought your species, I saw something we had lost. Humans are not the strongest or the fastest. Your technology is primitive compared to ours. But you never stop trying new things, new approaches. You find solutions where none should exist. You survive when survival seems impossible." She paused. "I need to learn how you do this. I need to teach my people to think differently, or the Catharan Empire will collapse within a generation. Why not just ask for human teachers? Why take me specifically? Because my nobility would never accept open cooperation with humans. They would see it as weakness, as surrender. But if I claim you as treasure, as a prize of war, they cannot object. You are mine to do with as I wish. If I choose to learn from you, it is my right as queen." Tayo understood now. He was not just a prisoner or a guest. He was a tool, a weapon in a political battle he barely understood. But he was also something else, a potential bridge between two very different cultures. "What do you want me to do?" he asked. Queen Vera smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "I want you to prove that human methods work. I want you to show my people that there are other paths to strength besides conquest. But first, you must pass my tests. I need to understand exactly what makes humans so resilient." "What kind of tests?" "You will see soon enough." She moved toward the door, then the first test came 3 days after Queen Vera's visit to the library. Guards arrived at Tayo's quarters before dawn, waking him from restless sleep. They said nothing, just gestured for him to follow. He dressed quickly in the simple clothes provided, and went with them through the dark hallways of the palace. They led him deep underground, down corridors carved from raw stone that still showed the marks of whatever tools had shaped them. The air grew colder with each level they descended. Finally, they stopped at a heavy metal door. One guard pressed his hand against a panel, and the door slid open with a hiss. Inside was a circular chamber about 50 feet across. The walls were made of the same black stone as the rest of the palace, but they were covered in strange markings that glowed faintly blue. In the center of the room sat a single chair, and beside it a table with a data tablet. Queen Vera stood near the far wall, her arms crossed. Next to her was a Catharan male Teo had not seen before. He was massive, even by Catharan standards, with scales so dark they were almost black. His eyes were cold and calculating. "This is General Hyon," Queen Vera said. "He commands my military forces. He believes you will fail these tests within a day," General Hyon snorted. "Humans are weak. They rely on tools and tricks because they lack true strength. This one will break quickly." Tayo said nothing. He had learned during the war that arguing with people who had already made up their minds was pointless. Better to let actions speak. Queen Vera gestured to the chair. "Said your first test is a puzzle. On that tablet you will find a mathematical problem. It has never been solved by any species in the Galactic Council. Catharan scholars have worked on it for 300 years without success. You have 6 hours. Tayo sat down and picked up the tablet. The screen displayed a complex equation, strings of symbols and numbers that seemed to twist and fold into themselves. He recognized some elements from advanced physics, but others were completely alien to him. The mathematics were at least 5 levels beyond anything he had studied. "This is impossible," he said quietly. "Yes," Queen Vera agreed. "That is the point. Begin." The door closed behind her as she and General Hyon left. Tayo was alone with the impossible problem. For the first hour, he tried to solve it directly. He worked through the equations, attempting to find patterns or connections. His engineering background helped him understand some of the concepts, but the mathematics were simply too advanced. He filled several screens with notes and calculations, but got nowhere. His head started to hurt. The glowing symbols on the walls seemed to pulse in rhythm with his heartbeat, making it hard to concentrate. Was that intentional? Was the room designed to make thinking difficult? In the second hour, frustration set in. He wanted to throw the tablet across the room, to shout that this was unfair and pointless. But he controlled himself. This was a test of more than just problem-solving ability. It was a test of character, of how he reacted to impossible situations. He stood up and walked around the room, stretching his legs and clearing his mind. That was when he noticed something interesting. The glowing symbols on the walls were not random. They followed a pattern, and that pattern looked similar to some elements of the equation on the tablet. By the third hour, he had a new approach. What if the puzzle was not meant to be solved through pure mathematics? What if it required understanding the context, the culture that created it? Catharans thought differently than humans. They valued directness and strength. Maybe their mathematics worked the same way. He started to look for shortcuts, for ways to bypass the most complex parts of the equation. Engineers did this all the time. When a problem was too difficult to solve directly, you found a workaround. You changed the parameters, simplified the variables, built a bridge instead of trying to move the mountain. In the fourth hour, he had something. Not a solution to the original equation, but a practical application. If you could not solve for x, you could at least define the boundaries within which x must exist. You could eliminate impossible answers and narrow down the possibilities. He worked faster now, his mind racing. The headache faded as he focused. He filled the tablet with new calculations, building a framework around the unsolvable problem. He could not find the answer, but he could prove what the answer was not. In engineering, that was often just as valuable. When the 6 hours ended, the door opened. Queen Vera and General Hyon entered, along with Mirai and 2 other Catharans wearing the robes of scholars. "Time is up," Queen Vera announced. "Show us your solution." "I do not have a solution," Tayo admitted. "The problem is too complex for me to solve directly." General Hyon laughed, a harsh barking sound. "As I predicted, the human fails." "But," Tayo continued, "I do have this." He turned the tablet to show them his work. "I cannot tell you what the answer is, but I can tell you what it is not. I have eliminated approximately 60% of possible solutions and defined the boundaries for the remaining 40%. Anyone who understands this framework could continue the work and potentially find the answer." The 2 scholar Catharans moved closer, studying the tablet. They began speaking rapidly in their own language, their voices excited. One of them looked at Queen Vera and said something that made her eyes narrow thoughtfully. "What did they say?" Tayo asked. Mirai translated. "They say your approach is crude but effective. You did not solve the puzzle, but you made it solvable. No one has ever thought to do it this way." General Hyon's expression darkened. "This proves nothing. He failed to solve the problem. He redefined the problem," Queen Vera corrected. "That is very human, is it not? When faced with an impossible task, they change the task until it becomes possible." She looked at Tayo with something that might have been respect. "Rest now, the next test begins tomorrow." The next test was physical. They took him to a training ground outside the palace, a flat expanse of dark sand under the red sky. The heat was crushing, easily over 100 degrees. Catharan guards stood around the perimeter watching. General Hyon explained the test. "You will run this course." He pointed to markers set in the sand, defining a path that wound through obstacles. "If you complete it in under 1 hour, you pass. Most Catharan soldiers complete it in 30 minutes. But you are human, weak and slow. I do not expect you to finish it all. Tayo studied the course. It included walls to climb, pits to jump, and sections where the sand looked dangerously loose. In Earth gravity, it would be challenging. In Velcora's gravity, which was slightly higher than Earth's, it would be brutal. I understand, he said. Begin. He started running. The heat hit him immediately, making every breath feel like inhaling fire. The sand shifted under his feet, making each step take twice the effort. Sweat poured down his face within minutes. The first obstacle was a wall, 15 feet high. He jumped for the top edge and missed, sliding back down. He tried again and again. On the fourth attempt, he made it over, dropping hard on the other side. His hands were already raw and bleeding. The course continued. A pit full of water that smelled of chemicals. A section where jets of steam erupted from the ground at random intervals. A rope bridge that swayed dangerously over a drop into darkness. His body screamed at him to stop. His muscles burned. His lungs felt like they were full of broken glass. But he kept moving, one step at a time, one obstacle at a time. He fell twice, got up twice. He vomited once from heat exhaustion, but forced himself to continue. The Catharan guards watched in silence. Some looked surprised. Others looked impressed. General Hyon's expression remained hard and dismissive. When Teo finally crossed the finish line, he collapsed into the sand. His entire body shook. He could not stand up. Mirai rushed over with water, helping him drink slowly. Time? He managed to gasp. 58 minutes, Queen Vera said. She'd been watching the entire time from a shaded platform. You passed. General Hyon stepped forward, only barely. And look at him. Broken and weak. This proves my point. Humans lack true strength. Queen Vera's tail lashed. He finished. That is what matters. A Catharan soldier is stronger and faster, yes. But remove a Catharan soldier from battle for a week and they lose their edge. This human was sitting in a library for days doing no physical training, and still completed a course designed for active warriors. Imagine what he could do with proper preparation. Over the following days, more tests came. A maze in total darkness that tested navigation and spatial awareness. A psychological test where he was locked in a room with nothing but his own thoughts for 12 hours. A problem where he had to repair a broken machine using only primitive tools. He passed some tests. He failed others. But he never gave up. Never stopped trying to find solutions even when solutions seemed impossible. And slowly, the Catharan court began to pay attention. Mirai told him that the guards talked about the human who refused to quit. The scholars debated his unusual approach to problems. Even some of the nobility began to ask questions about human methods. But not everyone was impressed. One evening, as Tayo returned to his quarters after another exhausting test, he found someone waiting in his room. Prince Doyen sat in the chair by the window, his dark scales gleaming in the light. He was smaller. Tayo stopped in the doorway, his body tense. Prince Doyen lounged in the chair like he owned it, his clawed fingers tapping a slow rhythm on the armrest. The room suddenly felt much smaller. You should not be here, Tayo said carefully. These are my quarters. Everything in this palace belongs to the royal family, Doyen replied, including you. My cousin may have claimed you as her treasure, but that does not make you important. It makes you property. Tayo entered slowly and closed the door behind him. Running would accomplish nothing. The palace guards answered to the royal family and Doyen was royal. What do you want? I want you to understand your position. Doyen stood, his full height making Tayo feel like a child. Queen Vera believes she can save our empire by learning from humans. She thinks your adaptability and creativity can solve our problems. This is foolishness. Why? Because the Catharan way has worked for 10,000 years. We are strong because we do not compromise, do not bend, do not change our fundamental nature to suit circumstances. Your species survives by being weak and flexible, like grass that bends in the wind. But grass is still just grass. It is never strong, never mighty, never worth respect. Tayo felt his anger rising but controlled it. If the Catharan way works so well, why is Queen Vera worried about the empire collapsing? Doyen's eyes flashed dangerously. You dare question? I am not questioning you. I am repeating what the Queen herself told me. She said your empire is dying from within, that your colonies are failing because you apply the same solutions to every problem. Those were her words, not mine. For a long moment, Doyen said nothing. Then he moved to the window looking out over the dark city. My cousin sees problems where none exist. Yes, some colonies struggle. Yes, our economy is not as strong as it once was. But these are temporary difficulties, not signs of collapse. What we need is more conquest, more expansion, more strength. Not human tricks. What happens if you are wrong? Teo asked quietly. What happens if the queen is right and the empire really is dying? Doyen turned back to him. Then the weak will be replaced by the strong, as is natural. If Queen Vera cannot lead effectively, someone else will take her place. Perhaps someone who understands that the old ways are best. The threat was clear. Doyen wanted the throne, and he saw Queen Vera's interest in human methods as weakness he could exploit. Why are you telling me this? Tayo asked. Because I want you to know that I am watching. Every test you pass makes my cousin more convinced that she is right. Every test you fail proves that I'm right. Either way, you are a tool in a larger game. When that game ends, tools get discarded. He walked to the door, then paused. Fail the next test, human. Prove that your species has nothing to offer. It would be better for everyone, especially you. Then he was gone, leaving Tayo alone with his racing thoughts. That night, Tayo could not sleep. He kept thinking about Doyen's words, about the political situation he had stumbled into. He was not just trying to pass tests. He was caught in the middle of a power struggle that could determine the future of an entire empire. The next morning, Mireille arrived with breakfast and news. Queen Vera wants to see you privately in her gardens. The royal gardens were different from the ones Tayo usually walked. They were hidden behind high walls at the center of the palace, accessible only to the queen and her most trusted advisors. Guards checked Tayo's identity 3 times before allowing him through the final gate. Inside, the garden was beautiful in an alien way. Plants with crystalline leaves grew next to pools of liquid that shifted between different colors. The air smelled of flowers that did not exist on Earth, sweet and sharp at the same time. Pathways of smooth stone wound between the plants, and in the center of it all was a small pavilion made from white marble. Queen Vera sat inside the pavilion, alone. She wore simpler clothes than usual, a dark robe without armor or crown. She looked tired, older somehow. When she saw Teo approach, she gestured for him to sit across from her. Thank you for coming, she said. Did I have a choice? A slight smile touched her mouth. No, but thank you anyway. She poured liquid from a crystal container into 2 cups and offered one to him. This is safe for humans to drink. It is made from a plant that grows only in these gardens. It helps with clear thinking. Tayo sipped it cautiously. It tasted like honey mixed with mint, cool and refreshing. He felt his tension ease slightly. Queen Vera drank from her own cup, then set it down. My cousin visited you last night. How did you know? I know everything that happens in this palace. Doyen is not subtle. She looked at the plants around them. What did he say to you? Tayo hesitated, then decided honesty was best. He told her about the conversation, about Doyen's threats and his belief that the old ways were superior. When he finished, Queen Vera was quiet for a long time. My cousin is dangerous because he is half right. The Catharan way has worked for thousands of years. Our strength and discipline built an empire that spans dozens of star systems. But he does not see what I see. He does not understand that the galaxy is changing. What do you mean? New species emerge all the time. New technologies develop. Old empires fall and new ones rise. The Catharan Empire has survived by being stronger than everyone else. But strength alone is no longer enough. She leaned forward. Do you know how many wars we have fought in the past century? 17. Do you know how many we won? All of them, except one. The war with humanity. Yes, and it was not because humans are stronger, your ships are slower, your weapons less powerful, your soldiers easier to kill, but you adapted faster than we could adjust. Every time we developed a counter to one of your tactics, you invented 3 new ones. You turned our strength against us, used our predictability as a weapon. She paused. That is when I knew. The galaxy has changed. Species like yours who survive through innovation and adaptation are the future. Species like mine who rely only on strength are the past. Tayo began to understand. That is why you need to change your society. Not because the Catharan way is wrong, but because it is not enough anymore. Exactly. But how do I convince my people of this? They have been taught their entire lives that strength is everything, that changing is weakness, that tradition is sacred. She looked at him directly. That is why I need you. I need living proof that other methods work. I need my people to see a human overcome challenges using creativity and adaptability. I need them to question their assumptions. What if I fail? What if I cannot pass your tests? Then Doyen wins. He will use your failure as evidence that I am wrong, that humans have nothing to teach us. The nobility will support him. I will lose political power, possibly even the throne, and the Catharan Empire will continue on its current path until it collapses. The weight of that responsibility settled on Tayo's shoulders, like a physical thing. He was not just one man anymore. He represented humanity's entire approach to survival. The pressure was enormous. There is something else you should know, Queen Vera continued. The tests you have been taking are only the beginning. Soon I will have to escalate. The nobility demands proof that human methods can solve real problems, not just pass artificial challenges. I am arranging something more significant. What kind of something? One of our colony worlds, Balros IV, is in crisis. The infrastructure is failing. Traditional Catharan solutions have not worked. Thousands of my people will die within weeks if nothing changes. She paused. I am going to send you there. You will have a small team, including Mirai and General Hyon. Your task will be to save the colony using human methods. Teo felt his stomach drop. That is impossible. I am one person, not an engineer corps. I do not know your technology or your infrastructure systems. How am I supposed to save an entire colony? I do not know. That is the point. You will have to figure it out, just as humans always do. She stood up. This will happen in 7 days. Use that time to prepare however you see fit. Access to information will be unrestricted. You may study our technology, our systems, anything you need. And if I fail, then many people die, and the Empire dies slowly afterward. No pressure. She smiled grimly at her own joke. As Teo left the gardens, his mind raced. 7 days to prepare for an impossible task. Save a failing colony world using methods he had not even defined yet. Prove that humanity's approach to problem-solving could work on a massive scale. He thought about Doyen's threat, about how the prince wanted him to fail. He thought about General Hyon, who believed humans were weak. He thought about all the Catharans who would be watching, judging, waiting for him to prove or disprove Queen Vera's theories. Most of all, he thought about the people on Balros IV. Catharan or not, they were living beings in danger. If there was any chance he could help them, he had to try. When he reached his quarters, Mirai was waiting with a data tablet. I heard about the mission. I brought everything I could find about Balros IV. Colony layout, infrastructure reports, failure logs, everything. Thank you. I also brought this. She held up another tablet. It contains human engineering textbooks and case studies that the Catharan military captured during the war. I thought they might help you think in familiar patterns. Tayo took both tablets. Why are you helping? The 7 days passed like 7 hours. Tayo barely slept, spending every moment studying the information about Balros IV. The colony was home to 60,000 Catharans, built on a planet with harsh conditions. Extreme temperatures, violent storms, and unstable geology made survival difficult even with advanced technology. The infrastructure problems were complex. Power generation systems were failing because of mineral buildup in the cooling systems. Water purification plants could not handle the unique chemistry of local water sources. Transportation networks broke down constantly because the routes were designed for efficiency rather than the planet's actual terrain. What struck Tayo most was how rigid the solutions had been. Catharan engineers had tried to force standard systems to work in non-standard conditions. When that failed, they tried the same approaches with minor modifications. They never seemed to step back and ask if they needed a completely different method. On the morning of the 8th day, Teo stood in the palace landing bay with a small bag of supplies. Mirai was already there along with General Hyon and 4 Catharan technicians. The general looked at Tayo with barely concealed contempt. This is foolish, Hyon said bluntly. The colony needs military engineers, not a human playing at being clever. Queen Vera has made her decision, Mirai responded calmly. We follow her orders. A sleek transport ship waited for them, smaller than the vessel that brought Tayo to Velcora but faster. As they boarded, Tayo noticed additional passengers. A group of Catharan nobles sat in a separate section, their fine clothes and jewelry marking their status. Among them was Prince Doyen. Mirai noticed Tayo's reaction. They are observers. The nobility insisted on sending representatives to witness what happens. They want to see if you succeed or fail. No pressure, Teo muttered, echoing Queen Vera's words. The journey to Balros 4 took 2 days. During that time, Tayo went over his plans with Mirai and the technicians. General Hyon refused to participate, sitting alone and radiating disapproval. The noble observers kept to themselves, occasionally whispering and glancing in Tayo's direction. Prince Doyun approached Tayo on the second day. "I admire your courage, human. Most would flee from an impossible task. But courage without capability is just stupidity. Maybe I will surprise you. I doubt it, but I will enjoy watching you try." Doyun smiled, showing sharp teeth. 60,000 lives depend on you succeeding. Can you imagine how they will feel when they realize a human was sent to save them? Catharans are proud people. They would rather die than accept help from a species they view as inferior. Tayo felt cold anger building. Then maybe they should examine their pride and ask if it is worth dying for. Doyun's smile faded. "Be careful, human. You are not among your soft-hearted species anymore. Here, harsh truths are valued over gentle lies." When Balros 4 appeared in the viewport, Tayo understood why the colony was struggling. The planet was a world of extremes. One side baked under intense sunlight while the other froze in darkness. The colony was built in the narrow twilight zone between extremes, where temperatures were barely tolerable. Dark clouds covered most of the visible surface, and lightning flickered constantly through them. The transport landed at the main colony spaceport, a collection of reinforced buildings that looked like they were fighting a losing battle against the elements. Governor Sumi met them at the landing pad, her scales dulled with stress and exhaustion. "Welcome to Balros 4, she said, her voice flat. "I hope you brought miracles because we need them." She led them through the colony. Tayo saw Catharans everywhere, many looking sick or injured. Buildings showed signs of damage and poor repair. The air smelled of chemicals and burning metal. This was not just a failing colony. This was a dying one. "Show me the main problems," Tayo said. Governor Sumi took them to the central power facility first. Inside, massive generators hummed and shook, their rhythm irregular and concerning. A team of Catharan engineers worked frantically trying to keep the systems running. "These generators provide power for the entire colony," Sumi explained. "They use geothermal energy from below the surface. But the cooling systems keep failing. The mineral content of our water builds up inside the pipes, blocking flow and causing overheating. We have tried flushing the systems, replacing pipes, changing water sources. Nothing works for more than a few days." Tayo examined the setup. The cooling system was elegant but inflexible. It required pure water to function correctly, but pure water did not exist on this planet. The Catharan solution was to purify the water, which required energy. That created a cycle where they had to use power to make power, reducing efficiency. "What if you did not try to purify the water?" Tayo asked. The lead engineer looked at him like he was insane. "Impure water will destroy the system. Not if the system is designed to handle impure water. What if you added filtration at multiple points instead of one purification stage? Use rough filters that are easy to replace. Let some minerals through but catch the worst of it. The water will not be pure, but it might be clean enough. That is not how the system is designed, I know. That is the problem." General Hyon, who had been listening, spoke up. "This is foolishness. Catharan engineers designed these systems. They know better than a human." "Catharan engineers designed these systems for standard Catharan worlds," Tayo countered. "This is not a standard world. You need non-standard solutions." He spent hours examining the power systems, taking notes and making sketches. The Catharan technicians who came with him from Velcora helped translate technical details and explained how various components worked. Slowly, a plan formed in his mind. The next day, he visited the water purification facilities. The problems there were similar. The systems assumed certain conditions that did not exist on Balros 4. When reality did not match assumptions, the systems failed. Tayo suggested using natural filtration methods, building artificial wetlands that could process water through biological means before it reached mechanical systems. The Catharan engineers were skeptical. This was primitive, not proper technology. Primitive does not mean ineffective, Tayo argued. Sometimes simple solutions work better than complex ones. On the third day, Prince Doyun gathered the noble observers and demanded a public meeting. Governor Sumi reluctantly agreed, and soon Tayo found himself standing in a large chamber facing dozens of Catharans, many of them angry. "This human has been here 3 days," Doyun announced. "He has proposed wild theories and primitive methods. He has criticized Catharan engineering and suggested we abandon proper technology. I demand to know what progress has been made. All eyes turned to Tayo. He felt the weight of their expectations, their skepticism, their desperate hope. Governor Sumi stood to one side, her expression neutral. General Hyon looked satisfied, as if he expected Tayo to fail publicly. Mirai gave him an encouraging nod. Tayo took a deep breath. I have spent 3 days studying your systems. I have identified the core problems. Your infrastructure is excellent, but it was designed for standard conditions. Balros 4 is not standard. You have been trying to force standard solutions onto a non-standard world, and that is why you are failing. Muttering spread through the crowd. Someone shouted, "We know this already. Tell us something useful." What I am telling you is useful, Tayo continued. The solution is not to work harder using the same methods. The solution is to change methods. You need to adapt your systems to match reality instead of trying to force reality to match your systems. And how do we do this? Doyen asked, his tone mocking. With your human tricks? With flexibility and creativity. Let me show you. He activated a holographic display and began explaining his plans. Modified filtration systems that worked with dirty water instead of requiring pure water. Geothermal taps positioned to avoid the worst mineral deposits. Transportation routes that followed the terrain instead of ignoring it. Power distribution networks that included redundancy and backup systems. As he talked, some Catharans began nodding. Others still looked skeptical. The engineers asked technical questions, and Tayo answered as best he could, admitting when he did not know something and suggesting ways to find out. When he finished, silence filled the chamber. Then Governor Sumi spoke. These proposals are unconventional, but we have tried conventional methods and they have failed. I say we give the human a chance. How long will these changes take? Someone demanded. I need 6 days to implement the most critical fixes, Tayo said. Longer for complete solutions, but 6 days should stabilize the situation enough to prevent immediate collapse. Prince Doyen stood up. 6 days, very well. But know this, human. If you fail, if even one Catharan dies because your methods do not work, Queen Vera's entire argument collapses with you. The Empire will see that humans have nothing to teach us and things will return to the way they should be. Tayo met his gaze. And if I succeed? Doyen's expression was cold. Let us worry about that if it happens, which I doubt it will. That night, as Tayo lay on the uncomfortable bed in the quarters assigned to him, he realized the true scope of what he faced. This was not just about saving a colony. It was about proving an entire philosophy, about changing how an empire the work began at dawn. Tayo organized the Catharan technicians into teams, assigning each group specific tasks. The local engineers watched with suspicion at first, but Governor Sumi had given orders to cooperate, and Catharans followed orders. The first priority was the power systems. Tayo could not redesign the generators in 6 days, but he could modify how they operated. Instead of using the standard cooling cycles, he adjusted them to run shorter, more frequent cycles. This reduced efficiency slightly, but prevented the extreme buildup of minerals that caused failures. This will waste energy, one Catharan engineer protested. Wasted energy is better than no energy, Tayo replied. Right now, your generators shut down completely every few days. Running at 90% efficiency continuously is better than running at 100% efficiency half the time. The engineer reluctantly agreed, and they began implementing the changes. It required recalibrating dozens of systems and reprogramming control units. The work was tedious and precise. Tayo found himself working alongside Catharan technicians, showing them techniques he had learned as a combat engineer. How to improvise repairs with limited materials, how to test systems safely, how to prioritize what needed fixing first. On the second day, they tackled the water purification problem. Tayo's idea of using biological filtration seemed strange to the Catharans, but he convinced them to try a small-scale test. They diverted a stream into a constructed wetland, using local plants that thrived in the contaminated water. The plants absorbed many of the harmful minerals and their root systems filtered out particles. It will take weeks for this to become effective, the chief water engineer said. I know, but we can speed it up by adding mechanical pre-filters before the wetland and chemical treatments after. The wetland handles the middle stage, doing the work that was overloading your purification systems. It was not elegant. It was not the Catharan way, but when they tested the output water, It was clean enough to use, and the system required far less energy than the original design. Word spread through the colony. The humans' methods were strange, but they seemed to be working. More Catharans volunteered to help. Tayo found himself directing teams of workers, explaining concepts through Mireille's translation when his limited Catharan language skills failed. General Hyon watched everything with narrowed eyes, but said nothing. He seemed to be waiting for a failure he could point to. On the third day, problems emerged. A supply shipment that was supposed to arrive from another colony did not show up. Tayo needed those supplies, replacement filters, pipe sections, control modules to complete the repairs. Without them, the work would stall. Governor Sumi checked the logistics network. The shipment left on schedule. It should have been here yesterday. Could it be delayed by weather? Tayo asked. Possibly, but the storms have not been worse than normal. Mireille looked worried. Or it could be sabotage. Everyone turned to look at her. Why would you say that? Tayo asked. Because Prince Doyen has been communicating with people off-world. I saw the transmissions logged in the communication center. He has the authority to issue orders, and some Catharans would obey him rather than the Queen. Governor Sumi's eyes flashed with anger. If he is interfering with colony operations, that is treason. We cannot prove it, General Hyon said quietly. And even if we could, accusing a prince of treason requires evidence strong enough to convince the royal court. Suspicions are not enough. Tayo felt frustration building. So what do we do? I need those supplies. You improvise, Hyon said, surprising everyone. That is what humans do, yes? Work with what you have instead of what you need. It was the first time the general had said anything even remotely supportive. Tayo stared at him. Are you suggesting I should? I am stating a fact. If the supplies do not arrive, you must find another way. That is what you have been teaching us, is it not? Adaptability. Tayo nodded slowly. All right, let me think. He spent that evening going through the colony's inventory looking for anything that could substitute for the missing supplies. He found old mining equipment that could be repurposed. He found building materials intended for other projects that could be redirected. He found a warehouse full of items that had been stored and forgotten. The Catharan engineers were horrified. Those are not the correct components. Using them could cause system failures. Using nothing will definitely cause system failures, Tayo countered. We test everything carefully, we build in safety margins, and we make it work. On the fourth day, using improvised materials and creative solutions, they completed the modifications to 2 of the 3 main power generators. The generators ran more smoothly than they had in months. Energy output increased and, more importantly, stayed consistent. The mood in the colony shifted. People began to hope. Children played in the streets again instead of huddling indoors. The marketplaces opened and Catharans went about their business with less fear on their faces. But the situation remained precarious. The 3rd generator was the most damaged, and without the missing supplies, repairing it would be nearly impossible. Tayo studied the problem from every angle, but some issues required specific components. You could improvise many things, but not everything. On the 5th day, another crisis emerged. The transportation network collapsed completely. A major route through the colony buckled and collapsed, cutting off 3 residential districts from the central facilities. Thousands of Catharans were stranded without direct access to food distribution or medical care. This is not related to our work, Governor Sumi said as they examined the damage. This section was due to fail regardless. The timing is just unfortunate. Tayo looked at the collapsed roadway, at the stranded residents, at the growing crowd of worried Catharans. We need to restore access quickly. How long would it take to repair using standard methods? 2 weeks minimum, the chief infrastructure engineer said. We would need to excavate, reinforce the ground, rebuild the road layer by layer. We do not have 2 weeks. Tayo walked along the edge of the collapse, his engineer's mind analyzing the problem. The ground had given way because it was built on unstable soil. Water had seeped underneath, creating voids that eventually collapsed. Standard Catharan construction had not accounted for this because the surveys assumed certain soil conditions. What if we do not rebuild the road? He said suddenly. What do you mean? The ground is unstable. Building another road on the same ground will just result in another collapse. What if we build a bridge instead? Span the entire unstable area with supports anchored in solid ground on either side. The engineer looked thoughtful. We have materials for bridge construction. But designing a bridge, calculating loads, ensuring stability, that takes time. Then we build a simple bridge. No fancy engineering, just basic suspension principles, strong enough to support pedestrian traffic and small vehicles. We can improve it later once the immediate crisis is past. General Hyon, who had been observing, stepped forward. I know something about rapid military bridge construction. During campaigns, we often need to span obstacles quickly. I can help with this. Everyone stared at him in surprise. The general cleared his throat. If we are going to do this human method of adaptation, we might as well do it correctly. Working together, they organized construction teams. Catharan's strength proved invaluable for the heavy lifting. Human engineering principles guided the design. Military efficiency from Hyon's experience kept the work organized. The bridge was ugly by Catharan standards. It was built from repurposed materials and held together with improvised fasteners. But within 18 hours it was complete and functional. The stranded districts were reconnected. Supplies could flow again. That night, Teo was exhausted. He sat in the quarters assigned to him, reviewing the next day's work plans. They had made incredible progress, but the third generator remained a problem. Tomorrow was the 6th day, his deadline. He needed that generator working. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. He opened it to find General Hyon standing outside. "May I enter?" the general asked formally. Of course, Hyon stepped inside, looking uncomfortable. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, "I owe you an apology." Tayo blinked in surprise. "For what?" "For my assumptions. I believed humans were weak because you lack physical strength. I believed human methods were inferior because they do not follow Catharan traditions. I was wrong." Hyon looked directly at Tayo. "These past days I have watched you work. You do not give up. You find solutions where we see only problems. You teach instead of commanding. This is strength of a different kind. A kind I did not recognize until now. Thank you, General. That means a lot. There is something else." Hyon pulled out a data pad. "I did some investigating about the missing supply shipment. I used military communication channels that Prince Doyen cannot access. The supplies were diverted to another colony by order of someone with royal authority. I cannot prove it was Doyen, but it was him," Tayo finished. "Yes, I believe so. He wants you to fail, but here is the important part." Hyon activated the data pad, showing a map. "The supplies are only 2 hours away. If we send a fast transport with military priority codes, we can retrieve them by tomorrow morning." Hope flared. The supplies arrived before dawn on the 6th day, just as General Hyon had promised. Tayo was already awake, pacing his quarters and running through mental checklists. When the message came that the transport had landed, he felt relief wash over him. The critical components were all there. Replacement control modules, high-grade filtration systems, reinforced pipe sections. Everything needed to complete the repairs on the third generator. Tayo and his team went to work immediately, racing against the ticking clock of Doyen's deadline. The generator chamber was hot and filled with the smell of overheated metal. The damaged generator groaned and shook, its systems held together by temporary patches and desperate hope. Catharan engineers and technicians worked alongside Tayo, their movements now synchronized from days of collaboration. "We need to shut down the generator completely to install the new control module," the chief engineer said. "But that will leave the colony running on only 2 generators. If anything goes wrong, we will lose power entirely." "How long will the installation take?" Tayo asked. 4 hours minimum. Tayo did the calculations in his head. 2 generators could handle the colony's power needs if consumption was reduced. "Tell Governor Sumi to implement emergency conservation, non-essential systems offline. Minimal lighting in residential areas. We can manage for 4 hours." As they worked, word spread through the colony about what was happening. Catharans gathered outside the power facility, watching and waiting. The noble observers, including Prince Doyen, arrived and stood at the observation windows above the generator floor. Doyen's expression was unreadable, but his posture radiated tension. He had bet everything on Tayo failing. Now, with hours remaining, success seemed possible. The work was delicate and dangerous. One wrong connection, one miscalibrated setting, and the entire generator could suffer catastrophic failure. But Tayo had done this kind of work before. Back on Arcturus Station when he jury-rigged defensive systems from broken equipment. His hands were steady, his mind focused. Mirai stood nearby, ready to translate any technical terms or relay instructions. She had barely slept, working as hard as anyone to make this mission succeed. "You are doing well," she said quietly during a brief pause. "I have been observing Catharan reactions. Many are impressed. Some are beginning to question their assumptions about human capability. What about the nobles? Divided. Some see your success as valuable. Others see it as threatening. Change is difficult for any species, but especially for Catharans who have built their entire identity around never changing." 3 hours into the installation, disaster nearly struck. A coolant line that should have been drained still had pressure, and when they disconnected it, scalding liquid sprayed across the chamber. Tayo grabbed a Catharan technician who was directly in the path and pulled him clear. The liquid splashed against Tayo's arm instead, burning through his sleeve and searing his skin. The pain was intense, but Tayo forced himself to stay calm. "Seal that line," he ordered through gritted teeth. "We do not stop now." A medical technician rushed over to treat his arm, but Tayo waved him away. "After. We finish first." General Hyon, watching from the floor supervisor's station, nodded with approval. "That is a warrior spirit. Pain is temporary. Duty is eternal." The final hour was the most stressful. Every connection had to be perfect. Every setting had to be calibrated precisely. The entire colony held its breath, waiting to see if the humans' methods would work or if everything would fail spectacularly. Finally, with 30 minutes remaining before Doyen's deadline, Tayo stepped back. "That is it. Everything is installed and configured. Time to test." The chief engineer initiated the startup sequence. The generator hummed, then roared to life. Systems that had been failing for months now ran smoothly. Power output climbed steadily to optimal levels. The entire facility seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. Cheers erupted from the Catharans watching outside. Even some of the noble observers looked impressed. Governor Sumi's face showed emotions rarely seen in Catharans: joy, relief, gratitude. Prince Doyen's expression went carefully blank. Over the following hours, they brought all 3 generators online and fully operational. The colony's power situation went from critical to stable for the first time in a year. The water systems, modified with Tayo's biological filtration and staged processing, produced clean water efficiently. The transportation network, including the improvised bridge, allowed normal movement throughout the colony. That evening, Governor Sumi called a formal assembly in the colony's main hall. Every Catharan who could attend packed into the space. The noble observers sat in a special section, with Prince Doyen at the center. Tayo stood on the stage, exhausted and nursing his bandaged arm, but standing tall. Mirai stood beside him, ready to translate. General Hyon stood on his other side, his presence a statement of support that did not go unnoticed. Governor Sumi addressed the crowd. 6 days ago we were dying. Our infrastructure was failing. Our people were losing hope. The Queen sent us help in an unexpected form, a human who promised he could save us using different methods. Many doubted. Some hoped. Today we have our answer. She gestured to Tayo. This human, Tayo Kim, has done what Catharan engineers could not. Not because he is stronger or smarter, but because he thinks differently. He adapts where we were rigid. He improvises where we followed procedure. He found solutions where we saw only problems. The crowd murmured, some voices supportive, others uncertain. Prince Doyen stood up. "Governor, if I may speak." Sumi nodded reluctantly. "Of course, Prince Doyen." Doyen walked to the stage, his movements controlled and precise. He looked at Tayo for a long moment, and Tayo braced for whatever attack was coming. But when Doyen spoke, his words were unexpected. "I came here believing the human would fail. I believed our ways were superior, and that learning from a younger species would weaken us. I was prepared to use that failure to prove Queen Vera wrong." He paused. "But I cannot deny what I have witnessed. The colony lives because of methods we would never have tried. Catharans are alive today who would have died under our traditional approaches." The hall went silent. Everyone waited to see where this was going. However, Doyen continued, "One success does not prove that we should abandon everything we are. Catharan's strength built an empire. Catharan discipline maintained it. We should not throw away thousands of years of tradition because of one human's cleverness." Murmurs of agreement rippled through some sections of the crowd. General Hyon stepped forward. "Prince Doyen is partially correct. We should not abandon who we are. But we must ask ourselves, what is true strength? Is it only physical power and rigid adherence to tradition? Or does true strength include the ability to learn, to adapt, to change when circumstances demand it? He turned to face the crowd. I have been a soldier for 40 years. I believed I understood strength. Then I watched this human work. He is physically weaker than any Catharan child. He has no weapons, no armor, no army, yet he saved 60,000 of our people. That is strength. That is power. Just a different kind than we are used to recognizing. The crowd stirred. Catharans talked among themselves, debating in low voices. Mirai stepped forward, her voice clear. I study other species. I have learned that every civilization has wisdom to share. Humans are not better than Catharans, but they are different. Their differences can teach us, just as our strengths can teach them. This is not about abandoning tradition. This is about adding new tools to the ones we already have. Tayo finally spoke, his voice steady despite his exhaustion. I came here not knowing if I could help. I am one person, with limited knowledge of your technology and culture. But I tried. I failed at some things and succeeded at others. The Catharans who worked with me did most of the actual work. I just offered different perspectives, different approaches. He looked around at the faces watching him. My species survived not because we are strong or smart, but because we never stop trying. When one method fails, we try another. When the situation changes, we change with it. This is not weakness. This is practical survival. And if it can work for humans, it can work for Catharans too. Governor Sumi raised her hand for silence. The Queen will want a full report. She will decide what this means for the Empire, but for Balros IV the decision is clear. We live because we were willing to try something new. That is a lesson we will not forget. Prince Doyen looked at Tayo, his expression complex. You have won this day, human. But one colony is not an empire. The real battle is yet to come. Then, surprisingly, he bowed his head slightly, a gesture of respect among Catharans. However, I acknowledge your accomplishment. You have proven yourself worthy of the title the Queen gave you. You are indeed a treasure, though perhaps not in the way anyone expected. The noble observers departed that night, returning to Velcora to report what they had witnessed. Tayo, Mirai, and General Hyon stayed 3 more days to ensure the systems remained stable and to train local engineers in the new maintenance procedures. On the day they left, hundreds of Catharans came to see them off. Children waved. Adults bowed in respect. Governor Sumi presented Tayo with a crystal carved in the shape of Balros IV, a